Good afternoon, colleagues. We will start in 1 minute to allow other participants to log in. Thanks. Good afternoon again, and many thanks for joining us in this third webinar on economic and social remittances as part of the IOM-MMC webinar series. And next, please. As mentioned, this is a webinar series that IOM and MMC have designed together. This is the third edition that will focus, and you will see, on a quite rich findings, both of our research as well as part of external speakers who have been invited and will be providing some remarks. And then there will be the last webinar of this series that is planned on the 16th of May that would talk about or will focus on the joint research between IOM and MMC on the migration and climate nexus. Thank you. Next. As of today, as already introduced, we have quite a very rich agenda. So I am Laura Nistri, the Regional Data Hub Coordinator at IOM Regional Office for the East and Horn of Africa. And the focus of today, of the themes, it will be remittances in a different dimension and aspect. We will first present some of the key findings of a paper that was released a few months ago as part of our root research strategies. Then this will be presented by Naomi Barnett, our analyst. Then the floor will be go to David Berno, Remittances and Inclusive Digital Financial Officer at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. And then some reflection to conclude will be shared by Killian Clifford, IOM Senior Specialist on Migrant Financial and Economic Empowerment. There would be time at the end in order to address the comments as well as question and answer. So as a ground rule, all mic and camera have been of the participants are deactivated, but we strongly invite you to please share your reflection and request in the chat, and we will make sure to go back to them at the final phase of today's session. Before passing, next slide, please. Before passing the floor to Naomi to dig and to delve into these themes, so just a few words about the methodology of the research, which findings are going to be presented. The Regional Data Hub for Eastern Horn of Africa, since 2019 launched this route research strategy that aims to investigate the migrant profiles, experience, and different thematics along the main corridors, migratory corridors of this region. By far, we are focused on the Eastern Corridor, but we, for instance, next week we will be launching a major Southern report focusing on the Southern route, that is the one that goes from the Horn of Africa to South Africa. And the findings that will be presented today, since they relate to a data collection phase that was conducted in communities of origin in Ethiopia, will be relevant for both the southern route as well as the eastern route. That is the one, apologies, I should have defined it before, that goes from the Horn of Africa to the Gulf Cooperation countries and largely to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It was a very large data collection, mixed method on 5 communities that has been investigating different teams. Many of them will be touched upon during the presentation itself. Other, we will be sharing the link to our publications that are online. And many of them have already been already been presented in dedicated webinars. So there is also the possibility to just follow the webinar itself that has been uploaded online. On this, I would like to give the floor to Naomi, if she can walk us through on the key findings on the economic and social remittances briefing paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Burnett, and I'm the research officer in the Regional Data Hub. I'll be presenting some of the key findings from the remittances briefing paper that Laura just introduced to you. As a note, all the pictures and quotes that you'll see in the presentation were actually taken in 2 of the research communities. So in Nisha, which is in SNNP, and that's a community where migrants mostly migrate along the southern route, and Setema in Oromia, which is predominantly an eastern route community. I'll start by talking about economic and monetary remittances. So estimates on the volume of remittances to Ethiopia vary quite largely between sources. And this variation often depends on whether the informal market is included in the estimate or not. But in 2019, the National Bank of Ethiopia estimated the value of remittances to have reached around 4.5 billion USD. So remittance flows clearly significantly contribute to Ethiopia's economy. And they're often viewed as a lifeline by households surveyed in our research, many of whom rely on remittances to cover their basic needs. Our survey data show that 59% of migrant households were receiving remittances once the migrant had arrived at destination. Most of these households in our survey reported receiving remittances on a somewhat regular basis. That is every 3 to 4 months or once or twice a year. According to our key informants, remittances are transferred to their communities both informally and formally. Migrants with a regularized status in the country they're living in often send remittances through the formal banking system or money transfer companies such as Western Union. Irregular migrants, however, often don't have access to such formal systems and have to rely on regular migrants to send remittances for them if they want to use the banking system. Most migrants or most households that we interviewed, however, were using so-called hawala systems of informal agents to receive money in Ethiopia, as they're cheaper than the formal banking system and also accessible to irregular migrants. So our data suggests that remittances provide an important contribution to household livelihoods. 47% of remittance receiving households rated them as very important and 39% as somewhat important to their household. Data on remittance usage may explain the great importance a lot of our surveyed households place on remittances. We have around 85% of remittance receiving households actually reporting spending at least some of the money they were receiving through remittances on everyday living costs. In
Naomi,
addition to,
apologies
yes.
to disturb. The audio is a bit disturbed. I'm not sure how you are. Now
well,
it's much better.
it's better.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, cool.
Sorry,
thanks.
maybe I was touching my headphones. I'm sorry. I'll try to stop doing that. Let me know if it persists, and I can always switch to different headphones. Okay, so in addition to supporting households in meeting their basic needs, around 42% reported using remittances to purchase consumer goods or appliances, and 34% were using remittances on investing in new housing or improving their current housing situation. And such improvements often include improved water and sanitation facilities, larger houses with multiple rooms, the use of a separate kitchen, and also electricity. Overall, survey data show that households with migrants abroad and or returnees also have higher rates of household goods ownership compared to non-migrant households, including furniture, entertainment devices such as televisions, vehicles, and mobile phones. In general, most households seem to spend the remittances they receive rather than save them, with only around 8% reporting that they were saving money for the migrant, and 4% reported saving them for the household. Moreover, very few households reported spending remittances on investments, on businesses, and other income-generating assets such as agricultural machines or vehicles. In a previous briefing paper, some of you might have even attended the webinar for that, which also drew on data collected for this same research study. We actually found that a lack of savings for the migrant and household may be contributing to challenging return environments for returnees. And our data show that particularly involuntary returns, which are particularly common along the eastern route, where migrants are often deported or some don't even reach their destination at all, are very challenging because these returns often occur suddenly and unexpectedly, and then either remittances are never received or they're expected and then they cease very abruptly. And this has a large impact on the households that were expecting these remittances. Our study found that many returnees returned to Ethiopia with limited or no savings in place to help them reintegrate, and that this really hampers their ability to not only set themselves up economically, but also renders these households that they're returning to and who are often very dependent on these remittances for their daily living expenses worse off than when the migrant was still abroad. And you can read more about this in our paper on return migration to Ethiopia, which is linked in the slide. So an interesting finding that has come out in the analysis done from multiple reports in this research series is that multi-migrant households tend to fare better across all our indicators, also in terms of remittances and their usage. 83% of households with multiple migrants reported that they were receiving remittances from at least one migrant, a rate which is almost twice as high as in single migrant households. Multi-migrant households also displayed higher standards of living in terms of the ownership of household goods, furniture, entertainment devices, compared to single migrant and also, of course, non-migrant households. Multi-migrant households also show more diversified usage of remittances, including spending remittances on the migration of further household members. And actually just under a third of multi-migrant households reported that remittances are paid for the journeys of at least one of their migrants. And migrants in multi-migrant households also seem to remit more regularly. And this ties in with our paper on network migration again, which if you want to learn more about kind of the multi-migrant households and their higher success rates, you can refer to that. So before I transition into talking about social remittances, I'd like to quickly talk about our findings on the impact of COVID-19 on remittances. Those of you who attended the last webinar will already have heard some of this, so I'll keep it brief. But it's actually the most interesting finding that came out of our COVID analysis. So I'll quickly share it with you. So our data on households who reported a deterioration in living standards due to the pandemic show that this negative impact was most pronounced in households reliant on remittances for their daily needs. Almost 3/4 of households who were receiving no remittances or who were receiving them rarely reported that their livelihood and living standards had been unaffected by the pandemic. However, households receiving remittances sometimes or regularly were much more likely to report that COVID had led to a decline in their livelihood conditions. Sorry. Moreover, some communities such as Rayakobo, a community where our data suggests that remittances are often of great importance as a household livelihood strategy, reported a far more severe impact of COVID-19 than communities where households received remittances less frequently. And this finding was extremely interesting to us because a lot of literature on remittances shows that remittances are key to household resilience in times of crisis. But our data actually suggests that if you have a crisis that's affecting both the remittance sending and the remittance receiving country, households reliant on remittances may actually be less resilient than those for whom remittances are not such a vital part of their livelihood. Okay, I'll now talk a bit about social remittances. So for those of you who are not as familiar with the term, social remittances refer to non-monetary transfers such as the exchange of ideas, information, practices, behavior, and social capital between sending and receiving countries. So such intangible exchanges can occur when migrants visit or return to their home countries, but also when migrants and non-migrants communicate transnationally through phone calls, social networks, video chats, or other people. And so the personal networks that span between locations, they really facilitate the transfer of ideas and information. They expose individuals at origin to the lifestyles of migrants abroad. They improve their ability to migrate through information, and they also spark migration aspirations. In the context of irregular migration of Ethiopians along both the eastern and southern routes, financial and legal constraints really affect the ability of migrants to travel back and forth between origin and destination. So direct face-to-face contacts often limited to interactions with returnees. However, communication technologies and social networks have emerged as a very powerful way to transfer ideas. And we call those indirect contacts. So I'll speak about both in this presentation. Okay, so although home visits are uncommon, I think there were maybe 2 or 3 households in the entire research that reported having received a home visit from one of their migrants. Face-to-face contacts and in-person exchanges of ideas between individuals who have returned and those who have not migrated are very frequent in all 5 communities. Data collected in all 3 phases of the research have demonstrated that returnees often play a highly significant role in sharing ideas and also knowledge about migration. In fact, almost half of the migrants we interviewed in the first phase of this larger research project, that was in Djibouti, when we were interviewing migrants in transit, reported that they felt inspired to migrate to Saudi Arabia after witnessing or hearing about the success stories of others from returnees in their communities. And they explained that, well, these images had fueled a sense of relative deprivation, but also help them imagine what their life could be like if they migrated. Returnee respondents, as well as aspiring migrants that we spoke to in this phase of the research, suggested that they frequently engaged in discussion with their communities on migration abroad. And participants explained that the content of such discussions mainly revolves around salaries abroad compared to salaries and job opportunities in the community, the sharing of positive stories about former migrants and their families who've improved their living conditions, bought vehicles, improved their housing, etc. And the content of these discussions is reportedly mostly positive, despite the fact that many returnees to these communities actually return after unsuccessful migration experiences. Yeah, and if we look at our household surveys, they actually show that in over 50% of households with at least one returnee had actually had an unsuccessful migration experience. But if we, for example, look at our data on migrants in transit, they also confirm that migrants and aspiring migrants tend to focus on success stories and the perks of migration rather than the journey and its risks. And similarly, returnees reported that they were much more commonly asked about the positive sides of migration, such as job opportunities, living conditions, salaries in Saudi Arabia or South Africa, than the risks and challenges of the journey. Social remittances are also shared through indirect contacts using communication technology and social media. And migrants abroad are equally important in sharing information on migration and life at destination as returnees are. The most common communication channels that aspiring migrants reported using to obtain information were IMO, Facebook, Telegram, and WhatsApp. And it actually seems to be common practice that non-migrants receive mobile phones and phone credit from friends and relatives abroad to facilitate such communication. Data from focus groups with aspiring migrants suggested that most aspiring migrants were relying on social media and communication with migrants abroad to collect information on how best to arrange their journey. And so despite the wide range of direct and indirect sources from which aspiring migrants can receive information, aspiring migrants, again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, seem to focus on favorable information, such as the impact of economic remittances on those receiving them, while at the same time often actively avoiding unfavorable information. This is also something we noticed during our interviews with migrants in transit during the first phase of the research. And we actually asked migrants why they were actively avoiding engaging with risk information. And the common answer was that they'd not sought out risk information so as not to be deterred from migrating by exposing themselves to threatening information when they have no choice other than to migrate. And other reasons included a strong belief in fate and or God having already determined the outcome of their migration and whether they will live or die, not really being within their control. And you can, if this is a topic that interests you, you can read more about this in the report To Change My Life. So while the driving force behind migration along both the eastern and southern route is economic hardship and the hope to improve livelihood conditions through higher salaries abroad, key informants discussed that particularly migrants younger than 18 have a very strong desire to change their lives and are much more likely to be inspired and influenced to migrate by successful returnees and the stories of migrants abroad and brokers. Key informants in all 5 communities reported that particularly the very young community members consider migration as a competition over who succeeds in migrating successfully and who does not, while giving very little consideration to the great number of risks involved in such irregular journeys. And KIs also suggested that young individuals may be more prone to migrate due to peer influence and pressure, and often migrate because their friends are migrating. At the same time, child migrants often depart with little to no preparation or information regarding the journey and often end up in highly precarious situations as they did not prepare enough resources to reach their destination. And this really makes them one of the most vulnerable groups that we see migrating along both the eastern and southern corridors. And so I think all these findings show how ideas and aspirations are sparked and amplified through both economic and social remittances and the migration narratives that they shape. And with that, I'll hand the floor back to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for walking us through the various findings. And above all, you've seen that, again, here we are, that other publication or briefing paper were referenced during the presentation. And all of them are accessible on our website, and they would detail the different phases of this research along the Eastern Corridor, the Southern Corridor, as well as now we are in process of finalizing the data collection for the last phase of this route research strategy, that is the Northern route. So migrants from this region heading toward the North Africa and eventually onward to Europe. Thank you so much for Anders, who has already posed a question. And then I would also invite Catherine, please. We will give the floor at the end because we have quite a packed agenda. So should you have any burning question or comment, please use the chat. We will follow quite an unconventional approach, meaning that we have dive in or delve on this community dynamics as related to the impact of different shocks, as well as the social economic remittances. But now I would like instead to give you the floor to David, that instead would provide a more macro understanding of the global and regional level related to remittances and related aspects. Thank you so much, and over to you, David.
Thank you, Laura, and IOM colleagues for the invite. As mentioned at the beginning, I'm David Berno, Remittance and Inclusive Digital Finance Officer at the FFR, the Financing Facility for Remittances at IFAD, the International Fund for Agriculture Development. I work in Kenya, and I oversee operation also in Uganda. My presentation today is divided in two main sections. The first one is to provide high-level global trends and data on remittances. And the second one is more about what FFR is doing in the region. So yeah, without further ado, let's move to the next slide. I wish to start with the provision of a general understanding of where we are with the remittance value and flows. Globally, for 2022, the expectation are to reach 626 billion USD, meaning 2% more than the previous year. While in the sub-Saharan region, the estimate indicates that the target should be about 53 billion USD, with an increase of 5% on the previous year. Then I wish to highlight the fact that generally speaking, remittance were impacted by COVID, but not so much as initially expected. As you can see on the upper chart, you see the trend, the downward trend was in 2020. But yeah, as I mentioned, the decrease was minimal, I would say, in terms of 2% or less, depending if you see the global or the low and medium income countries line. When you deep dive into analyzing the impact of COVID in the different regions, on the lower chart, you see that 3 out of 6 regions were impacted negatively, so the growth was negative, while in most of the region in the following year, in 2021, there was a solid rebound of remittances. And the forecast for 2023 are still positive in terms of growth. Next. The next slide provides a picture of the Eastern Horn Africa region by countries. I try to put together data from the World Bank. And basically here you see that Kenya is the largest recipient of remittances in the region. And last year they overseed 4 billion USD. And Kenya wasn't impacted at all by COVID. And was in 2020 the increase was close to 20%. And a similar trend was in Rwanda, which has positive remittances flows through the year, while we see differences in Congo, Uganda, and Tanzania, which suffered COVID in terms of volume of remittance received. Tanzania already reached the pre-COVID level, while Congo and Uganda are still lower to that amount. Ethiopia and Djibouti, according to the World Bank, are in the downward trend since 2019, whilst for South Sudan and Burundi, the data from 2019 and 2020 are not comprehensive, so any analysis can be made. Next. From a global perspective, it's important to recall that remittances, excluding China, represent the largest source of private funding to the low and medium income countries, exceeding the ODA and the FDI since 2015. Currently, remittances are 3 times higher than the foreign direct investment and the official development aid. And this is also the reason for which many recipient countries are trying to tap into remittances to support the local economy. Next. In terms of cost, at the global level, we are around 6% to send the equivalent of $200 US. And that amount is twice the SDG for 2030, that target 3%. Sub-Saharan Africa is the most expensive region to send the money to, but in general, there is a clear trend to see remittance costs declining over the time. And that is definitely supported by the digitalization of the remittances. Next. Now let me walk you through briefly the activities that IFAD FFR is implementing. And before doing that, let me mention that the FFR has been set at IFAD in 2007. In light of the recognition of migration occurs many times and starts many times from the rural areas. Therefore, many remittances flows are received by rural people, and at IFAD we saw the opportunity to leverage this development tool. Since 2007, the facility managed over 65 million USD, funding over 60 projects all over the world. Prime Africa is a 15 million program co-funded by the EU and is active in 7 African countries. Beyond Kenya and Uganda, we have South Africa, Ghana, Senegal, the Gambia, and Morocco. Next. The 2 main goals of the program are towards supporting the cost reduction of sending money home, rewarding and awarding with funds innovative initiative that will showcase such possibility, and to trying to be a sort of a vehicle to incentivize the market and the other market player to go into that direction. And the second major goal is about financial inclusion and to promote further financial inclusion, especially at the receiving side. We believe that remittance are a fantastic gateway for additional financial services linked to remittances. Next. In each of the country where we operate, we set up a national remittance stakeholder network that is a platform to convey public and private sector entities to discuss about the challenges and the opportunity of the market, and to support and to foster potential synergies and partnership. Under this network, we released and launched a national remittance market study that are available at remitscope.org. And based on these studies that have been validated by the stakeholder, we launched a roadmap for action. Next slide. Basically, the roadmap for action is an initial plan for action for the remittance ecosystem to come up and to address the challenges with potential solution. The roadmap was also very crucial for our activities in driving the call for proposal to award project in each of the countries we operate, and also to drive the activity led by SEMFRI in terms of technical assistance to select RSP. Remittance service provider. In fact, we believed and we realized that a big chunk of the cost associated to remittance come from the compliance cost the remittance provider need to bear and support. And basically, we try to support two remittance service provider for country. And last pillar of our activities is to support public sector entities. This activity is ongoing. We are discussing with different ministry and central banks. Next. I wish to spend 1 minute on the incoming Global Forum on Remittance, Investment and Development that IFAD is organizing with World Bank and OSA, the special Office for the Special Advisor on Africa. The summit will take place in over a month in Nairobi, Kenya, from 14 to 16 of June. The summit is a unique opportunity to meet with practitioner in the remittance space, and the topic that will be discussed will be fostering and supporting raising awareness, promoting dialogue, and stimulating partnership among public and private sector. So I kindly invite you to consider registration to the summit because I think it's an important event, especially for those in Kenya in the RINA region. Last slide, next. The summit, the last day of the summit falls on the 16th of June, that has been declared by the UN General Assembly as the International Day for Family Remittances. Since then, IFAD, that is the custodian of such day, is running a digital campaign to promote and recognize the migrant effort to support the development of their community and their families. Therefore, this is a call for action and for partner at public and private sector to join the campaign with statements, best practice and endorsement. And I will invite you to take into consideration to join the campaign. That's all from my hand, and happy to answer to any question coming from the audience. Thank you. Laura, you are muted.
Yeah, I activated just the camera. So yeah, that makes sense. I would say thank you very much for your several remarks and very interesting data. And yes, we'll go back to the question at the end in the interest of time. And I would like at this point to invite Kilian, if he's still with Kilian, he's still with us. to provide few reflections to conclude these rounds of presentation. Thank you so much, Killian.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, David and Naomi. And yeah, let me just give you a couple of minutes of reflections here. I don't have any slides to present, and I won't spend too long on this, because maybe we'll have an important discussion based on the questions we receive in the chat, and do send questions in if you have them. But just to reflect briefly on, say, the two presentations and try and combine some observations from them. As we saw from David, yes, global trends and remittances are thankfully continuing upwards or increasing, albeit not as fast maybe as some of the years previously. And we see from the paper, from Naomi, from the team in the East Africa Data Hub, on the importance that they have on development in those communities that receive them. Okay, some may spend their remittances on consumer goods like TVs and that sort of thing. Maybe you would question as to what impact and development they may have, but a lot of remittances received are spent on immediate goods like food, could be educational bills, health bills, even rent. And these are important development goals in their own right. So even though sometimes we have the consumption narrative around remittances being bad, they do facilitate at times the attainment of important development goals, at least for individuals. And also remittances can be saved. So in this example from Ethiopia, okay, maybe remittances, the proportion of remittances being saved wasn't as much as one would hope for. I think 12%, was it 12%? Or was it even less than that? It was the figure quoted. And there's probably more we can do as international organizations to kind of develop products around that to increase savings for investment. But those investments in new businesses from those savings contribute also to economic development. And of course, that's an important development goal in its own right. And David highlighted the cost issue. I mean, thankfully, the direction of cost seems to be going down. Africa still remains most expensive as a region as a whole, not just East Africa, but if you aggregate the whole region, it is quite expensive within sub-Saharan Africa to send remittances, and it has its own barriers, largely as David touched on the regulatory side of things, the cost of doing compliance. We have digital technologies, particularly mobile money, helping within the region, within Ethiopia itself. M-Pesa will launch soon, and that could help bring costs down further. And the work of Prime Africa and David and IFAD and the work that they do directly with remittance service providers can continue that downward trend. Now, just want to touch briefly on this observation around COVID. So we had sort of the observation at a aggregate global level on remittance flows through COVID, and we've seen that they remain pretty much steady despite predictions of large falls. I think they maybe only dropped 1.6%. And that was largely due to a move to formal channels from informal channels, and move to digital channels especially. And that was enabled by positive regulatory changes that made it easier to open accounts and to send money. Promotions by the private sector on prices, for instance, and then just encouraging cash-based customers to move to digital channels during that time. And also migrant behaviors as well. They were resilient in drawing down on their savings often. But that kind of ignores or skirts over what the issues that Naomi touched upon in her paper. Like what I've just said there, that's the official narrative that we've heard for the last couple of years on what's happened to remittances during the COVID period. But that really skirts over the issue of informal remittances, and whether that switch from informal remittances to formal remittances actually masked an overall fall during that time. So as we saw from the paper, many Ethiopian migrants lost their jobs during this time, had falls in income. And as we saw, households with high dependencies on remittances actually saw their resilience being undermined. They were left very vulnerable during that time as the migrants abroad lost their family members abroad, lost either their jobs or income. And that hints at some of the negative impacts of remittance dependency that also I think we skirt over as a, well, if you want to call it an industry, but certainly as international organizations. But it's interesting to see how having multiple migrants from the same household helps spread that risk a little bit, and helps spread, maybe increase resilience during that time. But what it is important to come back to that point on resilience or having a high dependency on remittances, reducing the resilience during times of crisis. Now, this completely challenges the mainstream narrative on remittances that we hear. And it shows the importance of speaking with migrants themselves, speaking with migrants' families, and having a more nuanced understanding of remittances, their motivations, and how they are used in the community as well. And that's before we even touch on the issue of irregular migrants who don't themselves have access to formal remittance service. They're forced to use informal services. So formal remittance flows, these are the kind of figures we see from the World Bank. These are not the whole picture, okay? And I think this paper highlights that especially. In fact, informal remittances within this paper account for the majority of remittances sent. And there's a separate study that UNCDF did around the Tigray conflict, which actually showed that during that conflict, informal remittances channels increased substantially as well. I'll touch briefly on social remittances, and it was an interesting part of the paper, see how ideas, practices, and identities and social capital have an influence on the decisions that those in the Remain communities and the host communities, sorry, not in the host communities, but in the communities that in the origin country, Ethiopia, had that influence decisions to migrate. And even though if there was a filtering of the negative experiences that those who chosen to migrate previously had encountered, but also kind of expand more widely in social remittances. I think the positive impacts of social remittances is often overlooked in the discourse on remittances. So migrants are much more than their economic contributions. And say within the space, a sphere which I concentrate on, which is the economic and financial side of migration, diaspora investment wouldn't be possible really without those social remittances as well. So you need the economic remittance, but you also need the transfer of skills, for instance, of mentoring, if you want to start a business from abroad, or if you want to help those back home start a business. So these are the social skills that are really important to developing these businesses, for entrepreneurship, maybe lending the skills for industries that are important to set up, such as green energy, for instance. And these can be facilitated through sort of diaspora engagement policies as well. So what we've seen here, at least within the diaspora investment side of things, and within this paper, is that the low savings rates is probably something that policymakers could look at. How can they facilitate savings products for migrant recipients, for communities, to link them with investments in their home communities. This shows the importance of financial inclusion and financial literacy within the realm of remittances, if you like. So that's my kind of brief overviews and trying to link the two presentations that we've seen. Just the two things to highlight: the resilience of remittance receiving households during times of crisis is probably not as resilient as we'd like to think, and informal remittances are as important really as formal flows, and understanding those is really crucial as a sort of international organizations who work in this space. Lastly, I do want to highlight what David's last two slides on the Global Forum for Remittance Investment and Development is happening in Nairobi. Do encourage those who are based in Nairobi in the middle of June, 14th to 16th, to attend if they can. I know a number of us from IOM will be there. And the International Day of Family Remittances on June 16th itself. So IOM colleagues have joined. Please do host events or highlight the work you've done, the great work you've done within the area of remittances. Anything you have over the last year in terms of blogs, videos, outputs, such as the paper we've just had. We'll certainly love to see that and promote that. So with those reflections, and with about 10 minutes left for Q&A, I'll hand over to Laura. Thank you.
Kilian, thank you so much for this very synthetic understanding and final conceptualization of the wide range of topics, because as I said, we passed from the micro level, and it should be stressed that the 5 communities that we have selected for our research in communities of origin of higher migration in Ethiopia, they were quite rural we do also have some urban, but not larger, so more peri-urban. And therefore, we speak of some of them, of some communities where migration, there is a real, let's call it culture of migration, meaning that migration is pervasive as a coping strategy, and just in a way in order to diversify the income, as well as because in those communities, they can even see that there are, for instance, other members and neighbors whose life standard have actually improved through remittances. So it is as much as all of them are largely irregular migrants. So again, they will go in the informal component of the remittance discussion that you and David have presented. They still have a very positive development impact that was sparking, as Naomi said, migrant aspiration. I maybe would like at this point to invite David, if he would also like to share some final remarks or just reply to the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura and Kilian. Yeah, I saw some question coming up from the audience regarding the amount of remittance sent, if I got correctly, the type of questions. And I would say that it really depends from which country you send the money from, and also what type of job you are currently doing. So I would say that on average, we saw in our countries where we operate remittance on average ranging from $50 to 300 typically. And I would say in many cases, they are monthly amount that family members send back to home. But in many other cases, as mentioned by Naomi, they are linked to schools or other, necessity that might occur throughout the years. And this is one question. The other one is about the just a clarification regarding the data I presented that, as mentioned, are from the World Bank. Those data are limited to formal and regulated remittances, while I believe and I recall that many of other fundings from the report are more informal. To mention that informality is still a commonality of remittances, and just to name a fact that BOU, the Bank of Uganda, is measuring with their own household survey research, that over 10% of the global remittances sent to Uganda are channeled through informal way, through a friends, through a person that they know, through a courier. There might be different ways, including Awala. So 10% of the volume and 27% of the remitters use the informal channel. So it's very important to keep this in mind. And lastly, yeah, I wish to reinforce the opportunity to be part of the Global Forum in June, since it's an important event, and I invite who is interested to join us to register on time, since we do have a limited capacity, and also the registration process to access the union, it's quite cumbersome, so it's better to finalize it earlier than the same day. With that, I close my comment, and thank again IOM colleagues for the invitation.
David, thank you so much again. Yeah, we can only reiterate the importance, if possible, to attend this global forum. We, as IOM, of course, Kilian is much part of the global delegation, but we will also be there as part of the regional data hub team, and we'll also facilitate setting up a booth with our research findings and product together with our IOM colleagues. I don't see any other question. Maybe, I don't know if Kilian, you want to say some final word?
Nothing specific to add. Maybe just, I think the question was on what are official flows, what are the kind of global data flows, including informal channels. And as David said, they don't really, they're based off of balance of payments calculations at a much more macro level. And if you strip out from balance of payments, if you strip out FDI flows, portfolio flows, net trade flows as well, then you're kind of left with what must be remittances. So they're very much done on a macro level and can only by definition include formal channels, which is why household surveys, like as David alluded to, what Bank of Uganda are doing, and I think more and more countries are looking to do this, are really important for us to understand informal flows going forward. Over.
Fantastic. Maybe last question on the fly, if someone is able to reply. We were just asked why Kenya has so high remittances and how that relates with the volume of migrants. Would you maybe, David, able? Thanks.
Yes, I'll be happy to take this. As Killian mentioned, COVID forced a lot of people to use formal remittances. And this, coupled with the high-level digital infrastructure in place in Kenya, augmented that volumes from our analysis. And let me also mention that Central Bank of Kenya and other authorities, local authorities, are supporting the environment. They run first remittance diaspora survey to understand the dynamics and to smooth any problem from sending money back home. And I think there is, as I mentioned in my presentation, an important attention from the government to see this flow increase for macroeconomic level. So Kenya has this peculiarity, I would say.
Fantastic. Do you maybe have a national remittance stakeholder networks in Ethiopia, out of curiosity?
Not yet. We hope to start our activities in Ethiopia. There is a study, a national study for Ethiopia. I shared the link for Remiscopa. Who is interested can look at the website and to read the national study for Ethiopia. In terms of activities, Ethiopia and Cabo Verde, we for the moment we just carry out the study. No further activities are planned, but hopefully in the future, with the with the fact that Safaricom already started the operation and other operator will be there, probably there will be more attention and chance to be there and do something like that.
At this point, I would sincerely like to thank you, our speaker, for this very rich exchange, one of the most interesting webinars I've been moderating. So thank you so much to both David and Killian for their participation, and of course to Naomi for presenting the findings. The fourth and last webinar is in a couple of weeks. Reminder will be sent. This webinar was registered and will be uploaded on our website and disseminated through our email campaign. So thank you so much again, and be in touch soon, colleagues. Have a good day. Ciao.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.